Leave this country, you pig." Her words, venomous and sharp, slammed into me, each syllable a fresh crack in my already fractured dignity. Victoria Henderson, her face a mask of pure disgust, had just hurled my life onto her perfectly manicured lawn. I was just a Filipina nanny then, a young woman alone, heartbroken, humiliated. But she had no idea, not a clue, that the so-called pig she kicked out would return years later, not just to the country, but to stand in her opulent foyer, look her in the eye, and buy that very house from under her. Oh, the delicious irony. And the look on her face when she realized who I was. That, my friends, was only the beginning of her reckoning. My name is Maria. My journey to that moment started far away, in a small village in the Philippines, filled with dreams much larger than our humble nipa hut. I was a young woman, barely an adult, but the weight of my family's hopes rested on my shoulders. Giving my younger siblings a chance at a better education, easing the worry etched onto my parents' faces. These were the ambitions that propelled me. So, when the chance arose to work overseas as a nanny, I seized it despite the tearing pain of leaving everything I knew. The agency painted such a beautiful picture of my future employers, the Hendersons. Wealthy, they assured me. Respected. Living in a stunning part of America. I envisioned a kind, welcoming family, a cozy room, and children I could pour my heart into caring for. I spent countless nights practicing English phrases, humming lullabies, and building castles in the air about the life I would create for them and for myself. The day I stepped onto that airplane, my stomach churned with a potent cocktail of fear and exhilaration. I clutched a small, worn photograph of my family, whispering a silent promise to make them proud. Landing in that vast alien country was like stepping onto another planet. But the thought of my purpose, the salary that would transform my family's existence, was my anchor. This is it, Maria, I told myself. Your new beginning. Mr. Peterson from the agency, a hurried but polite man, met me. The drive to the Henderson residence was a blur of landscapes I'd only ever seen in glossy magazines. Houses like palaces sat on impossibly green lawns, shielded by imposing gates. My heart hammered against my ribs. Then we arrived. It wasn't a house. It was a mansion, white columns gleaming, windows sparkling, a garden so flawless it seemed unreal. I took a shaky breath, trying to project a calm I didn't feel. This was it. Victoria Henderson herself opened the door. She was statuesque, her attire impeccable, her blonde hair sculpted into a style so rigid it didn't dare move as she tilted her head. Her smile was a perfect painted curve, but it never touched the cold chips of ice that were her eyes. "So you're Maria," she said, her voice as cool and crisp as an autumn morning. "Mr. Peterson has told me all about your eagerness." The slight, knowing emphasis on eagerness sent a small shiver of unease down my spine, but I quickly dismissed it. I was here to work, to excel. "Yes, ma'am," I replied, my voice hopefully betraying none of my nervousness. "I am very happy to be here and ready to care for your children." She led me on a silent procession through rooms larger than my entire village home. Marble floors reflected crystal chandeliers, and paintings on the walls likely cost more than I could earn in a lifetime. It was awe-inspiring and utterly terrifying. My room, small and sparsely furnished, was tucked away at the back, near the kitchen. Clean, yes, but a stark contrast to the opulence elsewhere. It was, however, a private space. I met the children, 8-year-old Emily and 6-year-old Tom. They seemed pleasant, if a little reserved. Mr. Henderson was a whisper in the house, a quiet man who mostly nodded and seemed to melt into the background whenever his wife spoke. In those initial days, I immersed myself in my duties. Cooking, cleaning, playing with the children, meticulously following Mrs. Henderson's exhaustive list of instructions. I yearned to be good, to be valued. Yet, a persistent, unsettling feeling lingered, a sensation of being perpetually under a microscope, judged with every breath I took. It was in the way Mrs. Henderson's gaze would linger on me, a flicker of something unreadable and unsettling in her eyes. The first truly jarring incident occurred about 2 weeks into my employment. I had prepared lunch for the children. A simple chicken adobo, a recipe passed down from my mother, a dish I knew to be both delicious and comforting. Emily and Tom appeared to enjoy it. As I was clearing their plates, Mrs. Henderson swept into the kitchen. She sniffed the air with theatrical disdain, her nose wrinkling as if she'd encountered something foul. "What is that smell?" she demanded, her voice laced with accusation. My stomach clenched. "It's chicken adobo, ma'am," I explained. "A Filipino dish. The children seem to like it." "Well, I don't," she stated, her tone flat and final. "This house is not going to smell like some village hut. Stick to the recipes I provide. American food. Do you understand?" Her words were sharp, dismissive, each one a small paper cut on my spirit. A hot flush crept up my neck. "Ma'am." "I'm sorry, ma'am," I murmured, my gaze fixed on the floor. It wasn't merely about the food, I realized with a sinking heart. It was about me, my heritage, being branded as something foreign, something undesirable in her pristine American world. After that, the subtle cruelties became a daily occurrence. A mispronounced word would earn me a loud, public correction, often accompanied by a self-satisfied smirk. She'd make disparaging comments about my clothes, my hair, even the way I moved. "Do you try to be less conspicuous, Maria?" she'd drawl. "Or is that how they do things in your country?" always with that condescending, superior tilt to her voice. Her presence became a source of constant dread. My stomach would twist into knots at the sound of her approaching footsteps. I tried to become invisible, to perform my duties with flawless precision, desperately hoping to evade her criticism. But it seemed an impossible task. Nothing I did was ever truly good enough in her eyes. The magnificent house, once a beacon of opportunity, began to feel more like a beautifully decorated prison. That initial unease soon festered into a chronic state of anxiety. Mrs. Henderson appeared to derive a twisted sort of satisfaction from meticulously finding fault with everything I did. One morning, she accused me of leaving an imaginary smudge on a crystal glass I was certain I had polished to a brilliant shine. "Are your standards really this low, Maria?" she'd questioned, holding it up to the light, her voice dripping with contempt. "Perhaps you're not cut out for a household of this caliber." Her words were like tiny, poisoned darts, systematically eroding my confidence, making me doubt my every action. Mr. Henderson remained a phantom. In the rare instances he was present and witnessed these verbal assaults, he would merely clear his throat uncomfortably and hastily find a reason to exit the room. His silence was a form of complicity that stung almost as deeply as his wife's overt cruelty. He was either utterly indifferent to my suffering or completely cowed by his wife. Perhaps it was a combination of both. The children, Emily and Tom, began to subtly reflect their mother's disdainful attitude. Emily would sometimes pointedly ignore my instructions, stating, "Mommy says you don't know how to do things properly." Tom, being younger and more susceptible to influence, once referred to me as the brown lady, his tone less innocent curiosity and more a parroted judgment learned at his mother's knee. My heart ached with a dull, persistent pain. I genuinely tried to connect with them, to offer them kindness and warmth, but their mother's insidious influence was a formidable, invisible wall between us. I recall one afternoon vividly. I was assisting Emily with her mathematics homework. She was visibly struggling with a particular problem. I gently attempted to explain it using a different approach, a method my own teacher back in the Philippines had used effectively. Suddenly, Mrs. Henderson materialized in the room, her presence like a cold draft. "What are you doing, Maria?" she snapped. "Are you trying to confuse her with your provincial methods? Stick to what her teacher says. You are here to supervise, not to educate." She then turned her attention to Emily. "Darling, if Maria tries to teach you anything, you come tell Mommy, okay?" The unspoken message was crystal clear. I was ignorant, incapable, merely the help from my part of the world was, in her eyes, inherently inferior. I began to take my meals in the solitude of my small room, even though I was technically supposed to eat with the children. The grand dining room felt less like a place for nourishment and more like a stage for potential public humiliation. I dutifully sent the majority of my salary home, saving very little for myself, all the while assuring my family in my letters that everything was wonderful. I couldn't bear to tell them the truth, to burden them with my unhappiness. I'd often cry silently into my pillow at night, the tears hot with frustration and a profound sense of injustice, wondering what made some people so capable of such casual cruelty, so utterly devoid of basic human decency. Was it my accent? The color of my skin? Or was Victoria Henderson simply a fundamentally unkind woman who reveled in exercising her power over someone she perceived as beneath her? The weight of it all felt unbearable at times, but the image of my family, their needs, their reliance on me was the lifeline I clung to. I just had to endure. I had to. But a persistent question echoed in the quiet moments. How much more could I possibly take before I shattered? The situation continued its relentless, soul-crushing descent, each new day bringing a fresh onslaught of microaggressions or blatant acts of belittlement. Mrs. Henderson's cruelty seemed to intensify, as if she were deliberately testing the limits of my endurance, or perhaps simply growing more brazen in her malice. She developed a habit of making me redo tasks that were already perfectly executed, apparently for her own perverse amusement. I vividly remember one day spending hours cleaning the already immaculate living room, only for her to saunter in, trail a perfectly manicured finger along a gleaming mahogany tabletop, and declare with a sigh, "This is still dusty, Maria. Do it again. And this time do it properly." There was no dust. I knew it. She knew it. But I had no choice but to nod, murmur a defeated "yes, ma'am," and swallow the bitter pill of resentment. She then escalated her tactics, beginning to misplace her own belongings, a piece of costume jewelry, a small amount of cash from her purse, and then subjecting me to thinly veiled, poisonous accusations. "It's so strange, Maria," she'd muse aloud, her eyes narrowed with suspicion as she looked directly at me. "Things just seem to go missing when certain people are around." She never outright accused me of theft, but the insinuation hung heavy and suffocating in the air, making me feel like a common criminal in her eyes. My stomach would clench with a sickening mixture of fear and righteous indignation. I was meticulously careful in my duties, honest to a fault. The very idea that she would even suggest such a thing was a profound and deeply personal insult. The children became increasingly challenging to manage. Emily would openly defy my instructions, and Tom would tattle on me for the most insignificant, often imagined infraction, frequently encouraged by his mother. "Mommy, Maria didn't fold my napkin right," he'd wail, and Mrs. Henderson would swoop in, her eyes blazing with disapproval as she glared at me. "Can't you do anything right, Maria? It's a simple napkin." My sense of isolation was absolute and crushing. There was no one to confide in, no friendly face to offer a moment of solace. The other household staff, a reserved gardener and a part-time cleaner, kept their distance, undoubtedly intimidated by Mrs. Henderson's volatile temperament as well. I continued to write cheerful, fabricated letters home, painting a picture of a wonderful life in America, complete with a kind employer and delightful children. The guilt of this ongoing deception gnawed at me, but I couldn't bring myself to burden my parents with the truth. It would devastate them, and they were depending on me. The breaking point, the incident that precipitated my ultimate public humiliation, arrived during a small informal dinner party Mrs. Henderson was hosting for a select group of her equally wealthy and disdainful friends. I had been instructed to serve drinks and appetizers, and then to remain discreetly out of sight. I was in the kitchen, carefully arranging a tray of canapés, when I accidentally brushed against a small, empty decorative vase that was precariously perched on the edge of a counter. It toppled and shattered on the unforgiving tiled floor. The sound in the otherwise hushed kitchen was as loud and shocking as a gunshot. Before I could even begin to gather the scattered fragments, Mrs. Henderson stormed in, her face a mask of incandescent fury. Her friends were visible in the doorway behind her, their expressions a disturbing blend of morbid curiosity and smug disdain. "What in God's name was that?" she shrieked, her voice echoing through the kitchen. "Are you completely incompetent?" "I'm so sorry, ma'am," I stammered, my hands trembling uncontrollably as I bent to pick up the larger pieces of broken porcelain. "It was an accident." "An accident," she sneered, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "You are an accident. A clumsy, useless thing." She turned theatrically to her friends. "You see what I have to deal with? It's impossible to find good help these days, especially when you get them from certain places." Her eyes, glittering with venom, landed back on me. I was kneeling on the cold floor, tears welling in my eyes, the sharp shards of porcelain feeling less cutting than her brutal words. And then she delivered the verbal blow that would shatter what little remained of my spirit. "You know what, Maria," she said, her voice dripping with unadulterated contempt. "I've had enough of you. You're fired. Pack your pathetic little bags and get out of my house. And while you're at it, leave this country, you pig. Go back to whatever sty you crawled out of." Her friends gasped audibly. A few even had the grace to look mildly uncomfortable, but none dared to intervene. Mr. Henderson, who had materialized in the doorway, simply stared down at his expensive shoes, a monument to spinelessness. The word pig echoed in the sudden ringing silence. It was so profoundly dehumanizing, so utterly and gratuitously cruel. I felt something vital inside me snap. The tears flowed freely, then hot, shameful tears of despair. I pushed myself to my feet, my legs shaking so violently I feared I might collapse, and without uttering a single word, I walked past her stunned, silent friends, past her cowardly, invisible husband, and made my way to my small room to pack. She had won. He had broken me, or so she believed. Being unceremoniously ejected onto the street with only my small, worn suitcase and a heart overflowing with despair was, without a doubt, the lowest point of my existence. Mrs. Henderson hadn't even bothered to pay me my final wages, callously claiming the broken vase cost more than any pittance she owed me. I had a handful of dollars saved, barely enough for a couple of nights in a run-down, anonymous motel. The agency that had placed me with the Hendersons washed their hands of the situation, conveniently deciding it was all my fault. I was utterly alone, jobless, and consumed by a gnawing terror in a vast, indifferent foreign land. For several weeks, I drifted in a haze of desperation. I took on any menial cash-in-hand job I could find, scrubbing greasy dishes in the back of diners, cleaning soulless motel rooms, handing out flyers in the biting, unforgiving wind. Each day was an exhausting, relentless struggle for basic survival. The profound shame of my circumstances and Victoria Henderson's parting words, "Leave this country, you pig," replayed endlessly in my mind, a cruel, mocking soundtrack to my misery. But alongside the despair, a tiny, almost imperceptible ember of defiance began to flicker within me. I would not let her break me. I would not return home defeated. My family was counting on me. One dreary, rain-soaked afternoon, while enduring a miserable shift handing out promotional flyers for a new restaurant, a kind-faced older woman accepted a flyer and then paused, her eyes filled with a gentle concern. "You look like you could use a warm drink, dear," she said softly. Her name was Mrs. Gable, and she owned a small, unassuming Filipino bakery cafe called Manila Sunrise. She offered me a steaming cup of coffee and a freshly baked pastry, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I experienced a sliver of genuine human kindness. I found myself confiding in her, not revealing all the humiliating, painful details, but enough for her to understand. She listened with patient empathy, and then, to my utter astonishment, she offered me a part-time job helping in the kitchen and serving customers. It wasn't much, but it was a lifeline, a beacon of hope in the darkness. Working at the Manila Sunrise Bakery was like a healing balm to my wounded soul. I was enveloped by the familiar, comforting smells of home, surrounded by people who spoke my language, who understood my struggles. Mrs. Gable became a cherished mentor, almost a mother figure to me. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to piece my life back together. I found a small shared room to rent with another Filipina immigrant. I worked tirelessly, saving every precious penny. And then one ordinary day, everything changed. A man began to frequent the bakery. He was quiet, unfailingly polite, always ordering a black coffee and a single pan de sal. He had kind, intelligent eyes and a warm, gentle smile. He introduced himself as James. He started engaging me in brief conversations, asking about the Philippines, about my life. I was hesitant at first, my trust eroded by past experiences. But there was an undeniable sincerity about him. He was nothing like the wealthy, arrogant individuals I had encountered at the Hendersons' mansion. He was down-to-earth, genuinely respectful. He told me he was an architect in the process of launching his own small firm. Over the ensuing months, Our casual chats deepened into meaningful conversations. He learned more about my past, about the Hendersons, though I still found it difficult to articulate the full extent of the humiliation I had endured. He was visibly appalled by the way I had been treated. "No one deserves that, Maria," he'd said, his voice firm with an unexpected conviction. James saw something in me that Victoria Henderson, in her callous cruelty, had tried so desperately to extinguish. My intelligence, my resilience, my inherent kindness. He saw my worth. Our friendship blossomed naturally and beautifully into romance. He was patient, understanding, and he made me feel truly cherished, valued for who I was. He encouraged me to pursue my own aspirations, not just to labor for my family, but for my own growth and fulfillment. He supported me in enrolling in evening classes to improve my English and learn basic accounting. And as his own architectural firm began to flourish, expanding far beyond his wildest dreams, he made sure I was an integral part of his success, valuing my insights and unwavering support. A couple of years later, James, by then a remarkably successful man, a self-made billionaire as the newspapers would eventually describe him, asked me to marry him. Wasn't a grand, ostentatious proposal, but a quiet, heartfelt moment over dinner in our favorite little Italian restaurant. He told me I was the strongest, kindest person he had ever known, and that he couldn't imagine navigating life without me by his side. The woman Victoria Henderson had so contemptuously dismissed as a pig and kicked out onto the street was now engaged to one of the city's most respected and eligible bachelors. The exquisite irony was not lost on me. My transformation wasn't merely circumstantial. It was profoundly internal. With James's unwavering love and steadfast support, I rediscovered my voice, my confidence. I was no longer the timid, frightened Nanny. I was Maria Roswell, a woman who had stared adversity in the face and emerged stronger, a woman who was deeply loved, a woman who knew her own power. And I hadn't forgotten Victoria Henderson. Not for a single solitary second. Years melted away. James and I built a beautiful, fulfilling life together. His success continued its upward trajectory, yet he remained the same kind, humble, grounded man I had first fallen in love with at the Manila Sunrise Bakery. We traveled the world, engaged in philanthropic endeavors, and I even established a small foundation dedicated to assisting immigrant women in navigating the often daunting challenges of starting anew in America. The memory of the Hendersons, particularly Victoria, still carried a faint sting at times, but it was no longer a raw, gaping wound. It was a scar, a permanent reminder of how far I had come, of the strength I never knew I possessed. Then one ordinary afternoon, James came home from his office with a peculiar, thoughtful expression on his face. He was casually browsing a high-end real estate magazine. "Maria," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "does this address happen to look familiar to you?" He held out the magazine, open to a glossy full-page spread. My breath hitched in my throat. It was the Hendersons' mansion. The imposing white columns, the gleaming windows, the flawlessly manicured garden, all instantly recognizable. It was for sale. Financial difficulties apparently, James continued, his eyes closely watching my reaction. Bad investments. A significant downturn in Mr. Henderson's business. They're looking for a quick, discreet sale, it seems. A maelstrom of emotions churned within me. Certainly. A dark, undeniable flicker of satisfaction. And something else. An electrifying sense of opportunity. James saw it all reflected in my eyes. "What are you thinking?" he asked gently. I looked at him, a slow smile beginning to form on my lips. "I'm thinking," I said deliberately, "that karma has a wonderfully ironic way of working, doesn't it?" He smiled back, a knowing glint in his eyes. "Certainly does. So, Mrs. Roswell," he said, using my married name, a name that now commanded considerable respect in our city, "are you perhaps interested in acquiring a new piece of prime real estate?" The plan crystallized in my mind almost instantaneously. We would buy it. Anonymously at first through one of James's holding companies. We submitted an offer, a generous, all-cash offer, significantly above the asking price, with a single non-negotiable condition: a swift closing. The Hendersons, undoubtedly desperate and likely overjoyed by the unexpected windfall, accepted immediately. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal paperwork, all handled with utmost discretion by our team of lawyers. I felt a strange, almost surreal sense of detachment, as if I were watching a particularly dramatic movie unfold. But as the closing date loomed closer, a nervous, exhilarating excitement began to build within me. James suggested quite casually that we be present for the final walkthrough, to meet the sellers as the new, still anonymous owners. "Are you sure you want to do this, Maria?" he asked, his eyes filled with genuine concern. "You don't have to prove anything to them or to anyone." "I know," I said, taking his strong, reassuring hand in mine. "But this isn't just about proving something to them, James. This is about closing a chapter for me. It's about facing the ghosts of my past, but this time on my own terms." He nodded, his expression full of understanding. The day arrived, crisp and clear. I chose my attire with meticulous care, an elegant, understated designer dress, heels that added to my stature, my hair styled to perfection. I looked at my reflection in the mirror and saw not the humiliated, downcast Nanny of years past, but a confident, self-assured woman. James, my ever-present rock, stood beside me, handsome and exuding an aura of quiet power. As we pulled up to the familiar mansion in James's sleek, dark limousine, a stark, symbolic contrast to the battered public bus I'd taken away from this very place all those years ago, my heart pounded a steady, determined rhythm against my ribs. This was it. The real estate agent, a nervous young woman clearly awestruck by our, or rather James's implied, status, greeted us effusively at the grand front door. "Mr. and Mrs. Smith," she chirped, using our agreed-upon temporary alias. "Mr. and Mrs. Henderson are inside, waiting to express their gratitude to you personally for the wonderfully quick sale." She pushed open the heavy oak door and there they were, standing in the magnificent foyer that had once seemed so vast and intimidating to me. Time, I noted with a detached clinical interest, had not been particularly kind to Victoria Henderson. Her blonde hair was still perfectly coiffed, her clothes undoubtedly expensive, but there were pronounced lines of stress etched around her eyes and mouth that hadn't been there before. Mr. Henderson looked older, grayer, and somehow more stooped and defeated than I remembered. Victoria's eyes lit up with a forced, overly bright smile when she saw James, clearly assuming he was the wealthy, benevolent benefactor. "Mr. Smith, we are so incredibly grateful for your generosity," she began, her hand automatically extending towards him. Then her gaze drifted past James to me standing slightly behind him. Her smile faltered, then froze. A flicker of confusion clouded her features. Then a dawning, horrified recognition. And then pure, unadulterated shock. Her jaw literally dropped. Her carefully made-up face went deathly pale, then flushed a blotchy, unattractive red. Mr. Henderson, following her stunned gaze, stared at me, his own eyes widening in utter disbelief. The air in the grand foyer crackled with unspoken history, with years of buried resentment and sudden, shocking revelation. The poor real estate agent looked utterly bewildered by the sudden, palpable tension. "Mrs. Henderson, is everything all right?" she asked tentatively. Victoria's hand, which had been hopefully outstretched towards James, slowly, almost involuntarily, fell to her side. She seemed incapable of speech. She just stared at me, her mouth still agape, her eyes wide with a terror I found immensely satisfying. I stepped forward, a calm, almost serene smile playing on my lips. "Hello, Victoria," I said, my voice even, clear, and carrying effortlessly through the sudden, heavy silence. "It's been a long time." The silence that descended upon that grand foyer was deafening, thick with unspoken accusations and dawning horror. Victoria Henderson looked as though she had seen a malevolent ghost, or perhaps something far more terrifying, a specter from her past she had long presumed vanquished, now returned, cloaked in designer attire and radiating a quiet, unshakable confidence that clearly unnerved her to her very core. Mr. Henderson finally managed to find his voice, though it emerged as a weak, stammering croak. "Maria? Is that truly you?" I inclined my head gracefully. "Yes, Mr. Henderson. It is indeed." Victoria finally snapped out of her paralytic shock, her face contorting, not with the arrogant disdain I remembered so vividly, but with a rising tide of horror and utter disbelief. You're buying our house?" Her voice was a hoarse, strangled whisper. "We are," James interjected smoothly, stepping forward to stand beside me, his hand resting protectively on my arm. "My wife, Maria Roswell, and I." He placed a subtle yet deliberate emphasis on my married name. The name Roswell in this city carried significant weight, a fact that was clearly not lost on Victoria. The full implication of his words seemed to hit her like a physical blow. She visibly recoiled as if struck. The real estate agent looked back and forth between us, her mouth now agape as well, finally grasping the monumental personal drama unfolding before her very eyes. "But how?" Victoria stammered, her eyes darting wildly between me and James, a desperate confusion warring with dawning comprehension. You were just a nanny." I confirmed, my voice still calm, but now infused with an undeniable firmness. "Your nanny, to be precise. The one you treated with such remarkable consideration." A delicate trace of sarcasm dripped from my final words, a small, delicious indulgence. Victoria flushed an even deeper, more unbecoming shade of red. "I don't understand." "Oh, I think you do, Victoria," I replied, my gaze unwavering. "I think you understand perfectly. Do you happen to remember our last conversation? Right here in this very house? You instructed me to pack my, and I quote, pathetic little bags. You called me incompetent, useless." I took another deliberate step closer. She instinctively took a hesitant step back. And then, if my memory serves me correctly, your exact parting words were, "Leave this country, you pig. Go back to whatever sty you crawled out of." Each word was delivered with surgical precision, each one a carefully aimed dart. I saw a fleeting flicker of her old, ingrained arrogance as she attempted and failed to regain some semblance of composure. "Now see here," she began, but her voice lacked all its former authority, sounding reedy and weak. "No, Victoria. You see here," I interrupted, my polite facade finally dissolving, replaced by a steely, unyielding resolve. "The pig didn't just leave the country. She stayed. She worked harder than you can possibly imagine. She met people who saw her inherent worth, people who didn't judge her by her accent or her place of origin." I gestured expansively around the opulent, silent foyer. "And now she's buying your house. The very house you so contemptuously threw her out of." Mr. Henderson looked as though he fervently wished the cold marble floor would open up and swallow him whole. He kept muttering, "Oh, my dear Lord. Oh, my dear Lord," over and over again. Victoria, however, still possessed a sliver of fight, or perhaps it was merely sheer, desperate denial. This is some kind of elaborate trick. You can't possibly afford this house." She sputtered, looking wildly at James, her composure rapidly unraveling. "How could she, of all people?" James cut her off, his voice as cold and hard as a block of Antarctic ice. "My wife can afford anything she desires, Mrs. Henderson. And right now she desires this house." He calmly produced the final closing documents from his elegant leather briefcase. "The sale is complete. This property now belongs unequivocally to Maria Roswell." The finality in his tone was absolute, crushing. Victoria Henderson stared blankly at the documents, then back at me, her expression a grotesque mosaic of fury, abject humiliation, and utter, soul-crushing defeat. The carefully constructed mask of the society grande dame had irrevocably shattered, revealing the petty, cruel, and now pathetic woman beneath. "So," I said, my voice softening almost imperceptibly, but with an undeniable, triumphant edge, "I believe it's your turn to pack your bags. Though I trust you'll be considerably more careful with your belongings than you were with mine." Her face crumpled. For a fleeting moment, I thought she might collapse into tears, or perhaps unleash a torrent of furious screams. Instead, a single, strangled sob escaped her lips. Mr. Henderson placed a weak, trembling arm around her shoulders, but he couldn't bring himself to meet my gaze. The real estate agent looked as though she were witnessing the dramatic climax of a particularly riveting stage play, which in a very real sense she was. "We'll allow you a reasonable amount of time to vacate the premises," James stated, his tone entirely professional now. "Our lawyers will be in touch with you shortly regarding the specific arrangements." And with that we turned to leave. As I reached the grand doorway, I paused and looked back one last time at Victoria Henderson, a broken, diminished woman standing forlornly in the foyer of the house that was no longer hers. "By the way, Victoria," I said, a small, almost imperceptible, yet entirely genuine smile finally gracing my lips. "Thank you. If it weren't for your rather forceful encouragement all those years ago, I might never have found the profound motivation to become who I am today." Then I walked out, hand in hand with my beloved husband, into the bright sunshine, leaving them to the decaying echoes of their collapsed world. The fresh air outside had never tasted so wonderfully sweet. The immediate aftermath was every bit as satisfying as the confrontation itself. The Hendersons were forced to move, naturally. We heard through the intricate, ever-active high society grapevine, which buzzed with this particular scandal for weeks, that they downsized considerably, relocating to a much smaller, far less prestigious neighborhood on the other side of town. Their carefully cultivated social standing plummeted spectacularly. The story of how the mysterious new billionaire owner of their former mansion turned out to be their once humiliated Filipina nanny spread like wildfire, becoming the deliciously scandalous talk of the town. Victoria, we learned, became something of a recluse, reportedly too ashamed and humiliated to face the society she had once so imperiously lorded over. As for the mansion, James and I never had any intention of living there ourselves. The memories it held, even with the sweet, lingering taste of revenge, were too tainted, too heavy for me to ever feel truly at home there. After some thoughtful deliberation, we decided to embark on an extensive renovation, meticulously erasing every last trace of the Hendersons' ostentatious and soulless decor. Then we partnered with my foundation and we transformed the sprawling mansion into a beautiful, welcoming transitional home and resource center for newly arrived immigrant women, particularly those in domestic work. It became a place where they could find robust support, learn valuable new skills, and begin their lives in America with dignity, respect, and genuine hope, all the things I had so desperately lacked when I first arrived. My life now is more wonderful, more fulfilling than I could have ever dared to dream back in my small, distant village. I have a loving, supportive husband, a profound sense of purpose in my work, and the considerable means to help other women avoid the kind of pain and exploitation I endured. Looking back, the cruelty I faced at the hands of Victoria Henderson was undoubtedly a dark and painful chapter, but it did not define me. Instead, it forged me. Victoria Henderson's malicious attempt to destroy my spirit ultimately, and gloriously, backfired. She inadvertently taught me a harsh but valuable lesson about the ugliness of prejudice and the corrosiveness of arrogance. But in doing so, she unknowingly lit a fierce, unquenchable fire within me, a burning determination to rise above, to succeed not merely in spite of her, but almost because of her relentless negativity. Karma, I've come to understand, isn't just about delivering punishment to the wicked. It's also about the universe finding intricate and often surprising ways to reward resilience, kindness, and the quiet, unyielding strength of those who refuse to be broken. And sometimes, just sometimes, it delivers that reward with a beautiful, poetic justice that is far sweeter, far more profound, than any fleeting act of revenge. My peace wasn't just regained, it was meticulously built anew, on a steadfast foundation of love, mutual respect, and the undeniable, empowering truth that a person's true worth is never determined by their fleeting station in life, but by the enduring content of their character. And my character, I am immensely proud to say, survived Victoria Henderson. Hers, I rather suspect, did not.